Hello, everybody. This is Zhou Zheng Show and Beautiful Life, and this is Zhou Zheng Art Channel. Right now, today, I invited a very special guest. His name is Dr. James Daichendt. He's an art critic and art history. He serves as the dean of the college and a professor of the art history at Point Loma Nazarene University in the Southern California. He's also professor at Boston University and James Daichendt. Okay, hello, James.
Joey, it's good to be here.
And we are Facebook friend, right? So, and I always saw your a lot of the Facebook, the interview people. That's very interesting. Post your recently post your speech and the TED, and also your interview, Robbie and Scott. I think
that's right.
Very interesting the interview and the book. So today, I will interview just for my audience, because I have the Zhou Zheng Channel Beautiful Life for 4 years in Los Angeles. Of course, Los Angeles audience also. So Los Angeles audience from the China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Macau, okay? And today I will interview the professor of the James and Daichendt. So, and I will ask you about your question. I know you are art professor. You involved the art and the teaching and writing for many years. So I want to know, tell me about your work and what do you enjoy doing the most?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, Joey, and it is good to connect with you on this platform. Sometimes social media and Facebook can be very distant, so it's good to see you again. And I know we connected at the LA Art Show.
With
so much art.
Speech there, yes.
That's right, this past year. So yeah, I'm a professor and an art critic, and I love the arts in general. And I think what I get most excited about in terms of why I do what I do is helping people to look more carefully at the visual arts and to help them see these things that sometimes can seem so mysterious. And often we'll go to a gallery or museum and we'll be unsure how we're supposed to engage with artworks. And so I really get a thrill out of helping the general public, but also my students think about work in a much more critical way so they can get enjoyment out of it. Because the benefits of art are just, there's so many. It can lead to a much better life overall. But so that's one of the reasons I teach. It's one of the reasons I love to write books, why I love to write art criticism for the newspaper, and just do public talks and discussions like this. I find it to be a very fulfilling and wonderful way. It's an outreach of my, I guess, gift of education.
I really interested in your new book. I know you just done the new book and publishing the already published. So I want you to talk about your new book. What's the title? What's the name? I want to ask you a question. Why you wrote this book?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. So the book is called Robbie Canal, Streetwise, 35 Years of Politically Charged Guerrilla Art. And this is what it looks like. And so it is a book that it's a book all about this artist, Robbie Canal. And so it features 35 years of his work. And basically Robbie is an artist that started in the Reagan era administration, started doing political art. And he's a satirical artist. So he likes to poke fun at different politicians or people in power. And once he does a portrait of these folks, and usually when we think of portraiture, it's a very sort of it's honoring. You know, rarely do we take a photograph or paint a picture, a portrait that's not flattering towards the sitter. Where Robbie's is they're kind of grotesque and they're sort of these ugly portraits. They kind of highlight all the problems with politicians, both the right and the left. And so once he paints a portrait, he then makes posters and puts them out in the street. And it's a sort of a democratic way to get his voice and the things that he's concerned about out into the public. And so in the book, it's his life story. It's a biography. It talks about how where he grew up, but also it includes every poster in his entire career. So it's really fun. It's an honor to always come in and sit shotgun in the life of somebody, especially a really interesting artist whose life is full of fantastic, wonderful stories. So it's a really was a fun book to do, and so far it's gotten a pretty good reception.
So where do the people can buy your book right now?
Yeah, so you can obviously you can buy this book on Amazon. You can buy it from Robbie's website.
Amazon.
Yeah.
So Jim, I want to know, what type of art do you find most interesting?
Yeah, that's a really good question because there's so much amazing artwork out there.
Yes.
I, especially now, I'm very interested in what artists are doing in this pandemic, how they're dealing with it. And there's a number of political and social issues that are happening around the world, but specifically here in the States, that I'm interested in seeing how artists are responding to these social calls and these political calls. So that's always an interest, and I think that's ongoing right now. But I would say on the other side of that, I'm always interested in work that's humorous. I love work that makes us laugh, makes us smile. It brings a little bit of levity to the situation because sometimes life can get a little too serious. But if you really press me, one of my favorite movements is pop art historically. So when I go back to the 1960s and 70s, I love the work of Roy Lichtenstein, Andy Warhol, and so many of the pop artists that followed. So anything that follows in that lineage, I'm neo-pop, I'm very interested in. But it's hard to pick one because there's always a movement or a style that will tickle you and you'll want to write more about. But that's what I'm thinking about at the moment.
Okay, James. So next question I will ask. Before I ask, I will tell my audience, you are got a lot of the degree. You got the bachelor from Azusa Pacific University. You got the MFA from the Boston University. You got EDM Harvard University. Also, you got EDD in the Columbia University. So you are really service scholar.
Yeah.
So my question is, what makes you to do research the street art? Yeah. I know the street art is started in New York in 1970s, right? Where does your passion come from?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you asking that question because it's something that folks are usually a little confused of. Because when I did my doctorate at Columbia, my research was in 19th century design education. So I was really interested in how schools of design were operating in England during that time. And so trained in many traditional historical methods, you can take those methods of scholarship and apply them to so many different areas. So when I was first teaching, one of my first assignments as an undergrad teacher, I found that so many of my students were interested in graffiti and street art. And it wasn't something I was always interested in. I had read several books about Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat and Kenny Scharf, who were street artists in the 1980s in New York City. And I was interested in that era. But when I found that so many of my students found street art, graffiti, tattoo, hip hop culture, things like that, I got turned on to it as well because I wanted to make art class interesting for them. And so I started learning more and more and digging into the research. When I started doing that, I found that there wasn't a lot. And I thought I could make a contribution there. And so by noticing where there was a hole in the research, I dug into it for a few years and started to produce some scholarships, some articles, several papers and presentations at conferences, and eventually several books now. I think I have 5 street art books. So that's how it got started. I still do a lot of research in other areas. But the street art and graffiti research happens to be so popular. You mentioned the TED Talk that I did a few years ago. Whenever I write about street art and graffiti, it seems to hit a larger audience, and it goes beyond academics and art historians and museum people, and it reaches just your casual art fan. And to me as an educator, it makes me excited because I can still teach a lot of the same principles of how to look at art, but I could do it through things like street art because it's so accessible. We love to take pictures of it. We love to collect it. We love to do sort of like almost like a scavenger hunt in the city to look for street art. And so anything I can do to help people look a little bit closer, the better. And so street art's helped me do that. And not only that, it's exciting, it's fun, and it is connected to pop art. So I like to think street art is an extension of when I think of like the modern movement of pop art, I think it as a neo pop art. So I see a continuation there, sort of long-term interest, even though I was born right in the middle of all that development.
So right now I found the answer for the reply, because you do research after you graduate, after you were ordered to be the teacher in the college, you were to research the street art. But before I'm not really care about the street art, but right now after your speech and the TED speech, after I saw a lot of the Facebook, the interview and the post, a lot of that, I'm right now interested in the street art. Interest as your speech. So I think you know why? I go back to the research, graffiti. Mm-hmm. This word, they came from in the Chinese word we call graffiti, mm-hmm. 涂鸦. You know where the word come from? Tang Dynasty.
Really?
That doesn't mean Tang Dynasty have the graffiti. No. So James, I will ask you, what do you decide which artist to write about?
Yeah, it's an interesting process of how you decide which artist to write about. Because if you're writing something short, like a newspaper article or a journal article, the time investment is rather short. So you can take chances and write about things maybe that might be outside your expertise. So for shorter pieces, sometimes I'm assigned them by an editor. Someone will be looking for a particular type of artist to be written about, or there's a show that I visited that I'd really like to write about and share more about. But it's the longer pieces, like the books, that take a little bit more scrutiny to decide to write about, because with a shorter piece, even if you're not sure about the work, you're going to be finished with that article in a day or two or a week or a month at the longest. With a book, you're talking several years. So you have to really appreciate the work and you have to be really invested because you want to finish it. So oftentimes it's a matter of getting to know, if the artist is alive, it's getting to know the artist and making sure your personalities align, and that person really wants to work with you, and that you feel like there's something there, a story to tell that's really compelling. If it's an artist that's since passed away, I feel like I want to make sure that we're making a historical contribution that's significant. You just don't want to add another book on top of a bookshelf of books about a particular artist. So I guess it's a combination for me, that I want to make sure I have a personal interest in it, but I also want to make sure there's a scholarly need for it, and that there's an audience for it. And it doesn't have to be something that's read by thousands of people. I just want to make sure I'm contributing towards the story overall, and that I feel like my work is standing on top of what others have done before, and that future scholars can come and build upon the work that I'm doing. So when you do historical work, I want to make sure it's lasting, and that it's not something that's only going to be here a few months or a few years, but things that other scholars will feel that'll be useful for them and that they'll want to reference.
Okay, so right now your new book, I still, because the title a little bit longer, but yeah. It's inside I saw, because you post the new book on the line, I saw it very interesting, because Robin always, he created a lot of the political. It is very interesting, very humor. They make the political portrait. It's very interesting people. So this book, the new book, when did you start to preparing, or I want to know the detail behind?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you asking. It was about 4 years ago that I wrote a book on Shepard Fairey. And Shepard Fairey may be one of the most well-known street artists in the world. And so Robbie Canal agreed to write the foreword for the book. And that's how we got to know each other. Robbie was an early influencer of Shepard, turned him on to street art, and was just a significant influence in his artwork. Since then, I've curated a few larger art shows that have involved street art, and about 4 years ago, I organized a show that had Robbie Canal in it. Our relationship continued, and we met and talked several times throughout those years. And I believe we had a phone call, and that both Robbie and his wife Deb were thinking about putting together a larger book. And they asked me if I would write an intro to it, just a short essay for a book that would feature all their political posters. And I said, of course I would. I would be glad to write something like that. And as I got to thinking about it, and as I researched more about Robbie's life, which involved growing up in New York City, both his parents were activists. His dad was blacklisted by the government. Robbie had moved around all around the country and had some really wonderful stories to tell about those experiences, and how he was mentored by significant artists like Leon Golub. I said, this needs to be a book. I said, we can't just do this in an essay. I think this needs to be a full biography. And he agreed. And so that's how the book came to be. So it was a very slow relationship from we worked together on a smaller book to an art show to inviting me to write a small essay for something. And it turned into something significant and quite big. So I know, like, when I look at like thickness of books, I always go, my goodness, like that's a lot of years of work there. So it's 3 to 4 years of work that went into that book. And it wasn't all writing, obviously. I mean, there's a few years of writing involved in that, but there's research and going through archives and images, and of course, talking to so many people in his life to collaborate or corroborate stories and making sure they were accurate. So it was a long way on this one. And they're not always that long, but this one happened to be.